Hey, 42 here. On the 29th of September 1913, a 55-year-old German bloke by the name of Rudolf boarded a steamship in Antwerp. It was a short overnight hop to his destination in Harwich on the southeast coast of England, but when the ship docked the following day, Rudolf was no longer on board. If you're wondering why you should care about a random German vanishing 110 years ago, allow me to give you his full name. Rudolf Diesel. When he disappeared from the decks of the SS Dresden in 1913, Rudolf Diesel was one of the most famous inventors alive, and no prizes for guessing what he invented. But here's the strange part. To this day, more than a century later, nobody really knows what happened to him. Some people believe he fell overboard in a tragic accident. Others think he willingly jumped. But still others point to tantalizing evidence that Rudolf Diesel, inventor of the engine that quite literally changed the world, was murdered, and that his killer got away scot-free after pulling off the perfect crime. As for who's right, let's find out. Right, so you've just got yourself a brand new phone and you're looking for the best mobile game to play? Well, enter Raid Shadow Legends, with its awesome visuals and loads of powerful champions. Raid Shadow Legends is increasing its roster of awesome looking champions with a brand new rarity, Mythical. A step above legendary champions, these new champions have a special new mechanic called Metamorph that allows them to change between two different forms. We all have different personalities. Like me, I have Work 42 and Beach 42. And if you enjoyed that Metamorph, wait until you see what the mythical champions can do in Raid Shadow Legends. They are the most versatile champions ever seen in Raid, and you can tailor your playstyle and create synergies across both forms. Their two forms both use the same artifacts, accessories, masteries, and blessings, so be careful when you're choosing how to use them. For new players, you can get your hands on Stag Knight, one of the best epic champions around, as well as a skin for Stag Knight designed by John Tron. Just use the promo code JTSkin before October the 7th. Also, check out legendary champion Sun Wukong, Raid's take on Money King. Just log in on 7 different days between now and the 23rd of October to get your hands on him for free. With all this exciting stuff and more coming to Raid, if you haven't started playing yet, then what are you waiting for? Use my link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses. We're talking an epic champion, Talia, from the Sacred Order faction, and other useful things like energy refills, a skill tome, and an XP booster. And thanks again to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. Despite being as German as beating England at football, Rudolf Diesel wasn't actually born in Germany, but Paris. The City of Lights and protests was his home for 12 years. He might have stayed there too, was it not for the somewhat awkward outbreak of the Franco-German War, a conflict that forced the Diesels to motor over the English Channel, first to London, and then back home to Bavaria in southern Germany. Diesel was always a strong student, but his talents transcended the classroom. In fact, he was something of a Renaissance man. He spoke 3 languages fluently, read and wrote poetry, played the piano, and was consistently top of his class in every subject. In other words, he was that special sort of arrogant bastard you meet at a party who can do absolutely everything. And when he bends over, you are literally blinded by the sun shining out of his arse. His strong academic record led to a scholarship at the newly founded Royal Bavarian Polytechnic of Munich, and it was there that he met Carl von Linde, a man who would change his life. These days, Linde is best known for founding the chemicals giant that bears his name. It's still a Fortune 500 company, even today. But back in 1875, when Rudolf Diesel arrived in Munich, Linde was a talented young professor of mechanical engineering, barely into his 30s. The two hit it off almost immediately. Both were academically brilliant, both had mustaches that smelt like oil and chalk, probably, and both shared a desire to see their formidable imaginations realized in the real world. While still lecturing in Munich, Linde invented a new kind of machine to manufacture ice. And by the time Diesel graduated in early 1880, Linde was in the process of setting up an industrial refrigeration plant in Paris. Being a talented engineer, fluent in both French and German, Diesel was the ideal person to help Linde get established. It was the beginning of what was to be an incredibly successful partnership. Between them, Diesel and Lind patented dozens of inventions over the following decade as Lind grew his fledgling company into an international powerhouse. But Diesel wanted more. As a Lind employee, all the ideas he came up with belonged not to him, but to the company. He was making a good living, sure, but his inventions were making the company millions. And no prestigious promotions or potent pay rises would change that. Diesel didn't just want a bigger piece of the pie, he wanted his own pie. And the only way to bake one was to start working on something so far outside his remit at Lind that it wouldn't be covered under the terms of his contract. And you guessed it, that something turned out to be blackcurrant pie. Sorry, I meant to say engines. My head's just full of pie metaphors now. Ironically enough, it was Lind himself who'd first given Diesel that idea. Back in their university days, Diesel had attended a Lind-led lecture in which he learnt two very important things. First, the steam engines of the day were laughably inefficient, on average harnessing less than 10% of their total available fuel energy. And second, according to thermodynamic theory, it was possible to make engines that were vastly more efficient. All Diesel had to do now was figure out how. To begin with, his efforts weren't overly successful. Actually, that's a bit of an understatement. They almost killed him. His early work focused on improving existing steam engines, and during one particularly ambitious experiment, the fancy ammonia vapor engine he'd just built exploded in his face. His injuries were so severe he was hospitalized for months, and his eyesight never fully recovered. And you thought your science teacher was just a knob for making you wear those silly plastic goggles. After several other, slightly less catastrophic false starts, Diesel turned his attention to developing a new kind of internal combustion engine. He came up with several important innovations. Most importantly, a fuel ignition system that relied on air compression rather than a spark plug. The first working prototype of what we now call the diesel engine was completed in 1896, and early tests showed it operated at 26% fuel efficiency, making it more than twice as efficient as any other engine in existence at the time. The implications were enormous. Any industry that used engines, i.e. basically all of them, could expect gigantic cost savings thanks to more efficient power generation. Not that it was all sunshine and roses. Early diesel engines were plagued with reliability issues, and Rudolf was forced to pay out refunds to countless unhappy customers as he desperately tried to improve his design. Things got so bad that in 1898 he suffered a nervous breakdown, briefly ending up in a mental hospital near Munich. By the time the new century got underway, things were looking up, with new and improved diesel engines being licensed for use in factories, trains, generators, and military vehicles both at home in Germany and abroad. By the time he boarded the SS Dresden, bound for London in 1913, Rudolf Diesel had pretty much made it. He'd built a huge villa for his family in Munich and had all but retired, living a comfortable life on a raging torrent of royalties from his great invention. Which is exactly why some people question the official version of events, that Diesel committed suicide by jumping overboard on the way to England in 1913. But if he didn't kill himself, what the hell happened that night? Let's start with the facts. Diesel boarded the Dresden in the early evening of the 29th of September 1913. He had dinner in the ship's restaurant along with most of the other passengers, then retired to his cabin at about 10 p.m, asking a porter for a 6:15 a.m. wake-up call the next day on the way. When that very same porter turned up the following morning to rouse Diesel from his dreams, the cabin was empty. A set of pajamas lay neatly folded on a bed that clearly hadn't been slept in, and the man himself was nowhere to be found. A more thorough search of the cabin turned up a diary open on the nightstand. Next to that day's date was a small cross. The theory goes that Diesel had scribbled it there to mark the date he planned to commit suicide. The search was extended to the rest of the ship, and beneath the railings at the very back of the vessel, Diesel's overcoat and hat were found in a neat little pile. The international press soon picked up on the story, and to begin with, the overriding response was one of confusion. Several of Diesel's friends and colleagues were quoted in newspapers expressing their disbelief that he would ever have considered suicide. But as the days went by with no sign of him, rumours began to leak out about failed investments and expensive patent litigation that had led to severe financial trouble. Some reports even claimed that Diesel had left his wife with a bag full of cash and instructions not to open it for a week. 10 days after Diesel's disappearance, a Dutch ship came across the bloated body of a man floating in the North Sea. The corpse was in a pretty bad state, so the men decided not to keep it on board, but they did hold on to a few personal effects found in its pockets, including a wallet and a pocket knife. Diesel's son later confirmed that these items belonged to his father. Now, I know what you're thinking. The clothes by the rail, the cross in the diary, the body in the water, the rumours of financial trouble. What's to talk about? The guy obviously killed himself. But let's not be so hasty, because the more you examine Diesel's disappearance, the more things start to look fishy. For one thing, if he intended to kill himself that night, why bother asking for an early morning wake-up call he knew he wouldn't need? And why mark the date in his diary? Committing suicide doesn't feel like the kind of thing that would have slipped his mind. Then there's the clothes by the rail. Why take his hat and coat up onto the deck in the first place if his plan was to simply jump overboard? There's also the question of why he chose that particular time and place to take his life. If suicide was the plan all along, as the cross in his diary suggests, was jumping off a passenger ship in the middle of the English Channel really the best method available to him? Even the motive for suicide is a little tenuous. Whilst it's true rumours of financial trouble surfaced after Diesel's death, it's also true that owning the rights to one of the most important inventions of the century created plenty of opportunities to make some fast cash if he really needed to. In fact, Diesel only boarded the Dresden in the first place because he had a meeting in London the following day to discuss a potentially lucrative license agreement. Had that meeting been successful, there would have been a huge cash injection into his bank accounts. Okay, so if it wasn't suicide, what was it? To answer that question, it might help if I tell you exactly who Diesel was planning to meet in London. The British Royal Navy. They wanted to license his engine for use in their submarines. Remember, this was January 1913, just over a year before the outbreak of the First World War. Tensions between Britain and Germany were at an all-time high, and here was Rudolf Diesel planning to sell his revolutionary invention to the soon-to-be enemy to help them make better subs. Is it possible the German government had Diesel dealt with to prevent that deal going through? Seen through the lens of murder, some of the stranger details of the case do start to make sense. The early morning wake-up call he didn't need, the timing just before a lucrative business meeting, even the cross in the diary and the clothes on the deck. What better way to cover up a murder than to make it look like such an obvious suicide? And it does feel a little bit convenient that his body was recovered by those Dutch sailors, proving he went overboard but then chucked away again before anyone had the chance to actually examine it to determine the true cause of death. As for motives, the rumours of financial ruin only seem to have surfaced after the event. Even Diesel's wife and closest friends knew nothing about them. So could they have been fabricated? Okay, so there's not actually any hard evidence that proves Diesel was murdered, but then again, there's also no hard evidence he committed suicide. Nobody saw him jump. Interestingly enough, it wasn't only the Germans who had a motive for his murder. Diesel had the rights to an invention that would go on to revolutionize dozens of different industries, and that made him an incredibly powerful man. But it also made him dangerous. One of his design goals when dreaming up his new engine was to make it capable of running on almost any fuel. His very first working prototype was just as happy burning peanut oil as it was petroleum derivatives. And that made the diesel engine a potentially enormous threat to the already immensely powerful oil industry. The brilliant inventor being murdered by big business or his own government might sound a little bit Hollywood, but these things really do happen. Governments have been bumping off their own inconvenient citizens for as long as there have been governments. And several major oil companies may have been taken to court over their suspected involvement in the murders of climate activists. In the years since Rudolf Diesel's death, the engine that bears his name has gone on to revolutionize almost every major industry on the planet. And even today, almost 130 years since its invention, it continues to underpin the world economy. As for what happens to the man who invented it, I'll let you decide. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to use my Raid Shadow Legends link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses for new players with an epic champion.